Good evening, everyone. My name is Angelica, if we haven't met before. I'll be reading this evening's devotional primarily out of Joshua 24:13. So I give you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them and eat from them vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. With gardening season well underway, many of our thoughts have turned to both the joyous and the laborious tasks that are involved in our plot of land and the urgency that every gardener knows, because the garden does not wait for the benefactor. If we miss the opportunity, the window of opportunity to plant, we produce nothing. Our land grows nothing. So we absolutely could and should find joy and peace and purpose in the tedious tasks of tilling and weeding and breaking ground, but ultimately our goal is towards the harvest. And the mature gardener, I want to say gardener, I mean to encompass all the lovely growing things that require a dedicated expertise, whether they be of climbing vineyards or fruiting orchards or colorful vegetables, golden grain, a field of grain, or valuable herbs and spices. To encompass all that, the mature gardener knows that sometimes we plant a harvest with full expectation that we will reap that this year, in the year that it's planted, and sometimes we plant things that we know will not reap, or we will not experience them for 5, 10, 20 years. And God gives us the expectation that we will eat of vineyards that we did not plant. As it says in James 1:17, every good and perfect gift comes from above. Indeed. And while we know that God is a giver of good gifts, we must balance and reconcile the tangible gifts with what he tells us in Matthew 4:4, which most of us know from the song, is he tells you, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. He's ultimately concerned with our souls, but and not just by the bread alone. So when he provides us with that bread, it should point us towards the purpose of the spiritual gift that it represents. So when he gives us those gifts, such as those good gifts from above, such as access to the fruiting vineyards, we must recognize it is not for the sole purpose of living off of the bread or off of the land alone. And knowing that there are rewards that we will not see come to maturity for 20 years from now, we need to resolve that this particular effort in growing and planting and maintaining a vineyard, olive grove, a well, the city that particular effort may not be for us. Now these potatoes right here, so you can see, everyone grows potatoes, right? We've planted those with the intention of those for our family this year. We plan to receive the benefit of those. But right next to that, we have this little stick, this lonely, sad stick, which is right at the very top, has a bud, which indicates that it shows the promise of a hazelnut tree, which we may not see the fruitfulness for 5 to 10 years from now in its full bounty. And then right over there, we have some walnut trees that we're looking at 20 years before we can see it in its fullness. And see in its full measure. And they say the best time to plant an oak tree is 20 years ago. And the second best time to plant an oak tree is today. So whether that be physical or spiritual for you, if you haven't planted your oak tree 20 years ago, you can still start today, and that's the second best time. And as Christians, we must not lose heart that much of what we plant and harvest and till is not for our generation. We must not tend to those gardens which we know aren't for us with any less fervor than the ones that we would give to the ones for ourselves. We must tend them both with the same enthusiasm, whether we're working for someone else or for our own benefit. And I say ultimately, even to the point of death. William Tyndale as you know, was burned at the stake in part for his role in helping translate the Bible into English, being martyred in 1536. So I guess you could say that the vine he planted a vine 480 years ago by his death, by putting this in English, but we're still eating from the fruit of that. He would plant a seed with his life that he would never see the harvest of, but he still planted. Stephen was stoned as a martyr for his proclamation and his faith of Jesus, the Messiah. And he was as hopeful as his little sunflower seeds right here. His little seeds. His little seeds pushed down, broken in expected anticipation of that the fruition of his devotion would offer a harvest that he would never see with his own eyes. And who was it that consumed directly from his spiritual vineyard? Who drank from his spiritual well? Well, that was Paul. Right? Paul would be the recipient of a city that he did not build and an olive tree that he did not plant. And what a great harvest that was. Right? So there's a saying, man can count the seeds in an apple, but only God can count the amount of apples in a seed. So we can see what's in front of us, but only he can see what will come of what's in front of us. So fast forward 2,000 years, and I don't know about you, but the many abundances that come from toil that was done before I was even a twinkle in my mama's eyes. The cherry orchards here, where we gather all of our fruit, and the walnuts that fall all over the sidewalks in town, and the apples that grow just a crispness all around us. I did not plant any of those trees, and we have an abundance of those. And so as a generation of American dwelling Christians, we daily have eaten of the spiritual vineyards that we have not planted, just as we harvest and glean from the fruits of the trees that have been around here for 20, 50, 100 years, and thousands of years since Joshua proclaimed the Lord's promise of eating of vineyards that we did not plant. Even though that promise was specifically for the Israelites, if we are to take of the promise of that, we also must partake of the responsibility and the warning, which we can find in Deuteronomy 6:11. The houses will be richly stocked with goods you do not produce. You will draw from the water from cisterns you did not dig. You will eat from the vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. When you have eaten your fill in this land, be careful not to forget the Lord who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. So we have to make sure that we don't forsake who gave us those vineyards. So when you read the planting directions on your sugar maple tree, and you see years to maturity, 30 to 40 years, and you add 30 to 40 years to your current age, or if you read through Revelation and realize that most of the signs of the end of times have already been checked off, and you wonder, will we even be around 30 to 40 years from now? You still must expend your effort into planting that sugar maple tree. It may feel as productive as rearranging the seats on the Titanic, but plant anyway. That sweet syrup may not be for you. It may be meant for your children or your grandchildren or a generation of unbelievers. Or should the trumpet sound and your toiling and building may be meant for those left behind. Bear in mind, like Stephen, like Tyndale, like the silent prayers of a quietly praying grandmother, you may not see the fruits of your labor, physically or spiritually. Plant anyway, physically and spiritually. And just like the recipients of the olive groves, like the Israelites, like Paul, and like modern day American followers of Jesus Christ, we must heed the warning of Deuteronomy to remember to give all the credit and thanks to God for our ability to consume both physical and spiritual fruit, lest we become proud, which we don't want to do. And the fruit of those who have planted before us is what nourished us as our own roots have taken have taken hold. And in return, we must keep the vineyard flourishing for the next set of workers. Like, in fact, Colossians 3:23, whatsoever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. And work right up until the end. Matthew 24:40 through 42. 2 men will be working together in the field. One will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken, the other left. Normally we think of that solely in the idea of being raptured, but look at what they were doing right up until that point. So we are not meant to sit idly by waiting for our last breath or waiting for the Lord to return just because our harvest is in. No, just as in Matthew, right up until the end, we should be planting a new crop, even if we are called home right in the middle of it. So I leave with these thoughts. One, who can we personally give honor to that have already labored for vineyards for which we reap? Who can we give homage to? Somebody who's already paved the way for us spiritually and physically. And then 2, what cities are we building? What wells are we digging? What trees are we planting, which we are anticipating we will not harvest from? So what spiritual legacy or heritage are we leaving? And then 3rd would be, who do you envision will reap what you sow? Has God put on your heart who you are breaking ground for, whether it be your children or grandchildren, or a new believer, or a poor wandering soul that's been left behind after the rapture? What are you leaving? Who do you envision stumbling upon your already ripe vineyard? Some things to think about, and I hope Jesus gives you a wonderful gardening season and a renewed awareness of the sweetness of fruits for which we did not plant.